The Creator was directed by Gareth Edwards. Edwards, not Evans. That's the guy who did the raid. Although if the two combined, that would be pretty awesome. That'd be amazing, actually. And it stars actually some really cool people. Not an insanely star-studded cast. This isn't Oppenheimer. John David Washington, Gemma Chan, Ken Watanabe, Ralph Ineson, who I actually love. It's got a few other people in it who I can't quite remember. I'm just going to the top of my head. But yeah, so The Creator is a original science fiction film. It's not based on anything, actually. Well, it's like it's heavily inspired by a lot of stuff. A lot of old war films and a lot of current events as well with AI, and it's sort of just like an accumulation of all of Gareth Edwards' influences and inspirations, obviously. But what it is its core is a completely original, massive science fiction film. Not massive budget though, and I really want to get into that. The fact that this film only cost $80 million is crazy because it might be the best looking film I've ever seen, and it actually might be my favorite sci-fi film ever made. Like genuinely. Obviously there is strong competition. Oblivion is up there, for example, and honestly, The World's End, the Edgar Wright film, the final film in the Cornetto trilogy, because it is technically a sci-fi film, but obviously it's much more focused on comedy and other elements, and uses the science fiction elements as more of a device. So when it comes to something that's very pure sci-fi, this is a winner for me. And it's part of the reason for that is not because it actually has the most original plot, not because every part of it works from a story perspective, but just the fact that it appeals to me on an aesthetic level, like no film ever actually has. My favorite films are and remain the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they don't actually appeal to me on an aesthetic level in many specific ways. I think it's an extremely well-designed world, and every character design, every creature's design is actually pretty much as good as it can be. It's just not. It just doesn't play into my taste specifically what the Creator does. The Creator is perfect science fiction aesthetic, in my opinion. And to be honest, I can't say that much without getting into spoilers, although the spoilers won't be too heavy either. I just want to point out that the film to me is more than just a showcase of sort of special effects. I think a lot of people are seeing it that way, and I think that's completely wrong. I don't think the plot is the most original thing in the world either, but in my opinion, sort of what this is, if you want to be very reductionist, I would call this Blade Runner 2049, but exciting, which is my way of saying I don't find Blade Runner 2049 all that enjoyable to watch. It's a very impressive film. It's one of the best looking films ever. It's such an amazing realization of a vision of the future. But so is this. This actually is a really kinetic, exciting, and well-paced story to accompany it. And that's kind of all I can really say about spoilers. The performances are all pretty much perfect. There's really nothing wrong there. The action sequences are, I would say, kind of muted. They're very deliberate. This isn't an action showcase. Like I said, this isn't Gareth Evans. This is Gareth Edwards. But it still manages to remain very exciting. I actually found the emotional core of the film really effective, actually, which really surprised me. But yeah, I really have to get into spoilers. So, spoiler alert for The Creator. So, The Creator, I think it was Namata is what it's called, is actually what The Creator's called. And the main character, Josh, played by John David Washington, the Creator is kind of his wife, and the AI create a weapon which is sort of his daughter, or at least it's a AI robot based on his daughter that his wife was pregnant with before things went to shit, basically. But I think what appealed to me greatly about the premise, and that made the premise actually very unique and valuable, was the fact that it wasn't a case of the world having been taken over by AI. It was actually almost the opposite of sort of AI and robot people were being introduced to society over during this alternate history that the film presents, until it gets to a point where something goes wrong. Something that's actually revealed to be a human error. The AI people launch a nuke at Los Angeles, and this results in a war being waged upon the robots and them sort of being suppressed and banned, except in Asia, where they are retained and kept as a normal part of society. and this is where the film sort of really blurs the lines of morality, like who's actually the good guy. 'Cause it's not pro-humanity, but it's also not exactly pro-AI either. It was actually very difficult to discern what the message is, and I think the message really is just about human malice rather than actually being pro-AI. I don't think it's actually pro-AI at all. I think it's just using AI as a surrogate for basically something that humanity creates we would still hate, basically, because we got it right. I really like the idea that because humanity actually got AI right, made them almost like basically parallel with humans. They act and look like people for the most part. And that we would basically just come to reject them based on a human mistake. You know, the fact that they launched the nuke was the result of a human error anyway. So I found that very interesting. And another reason why it's not really pro either of these sides is because the actual main sort of finale is when it on a very plot basis of the actual events happening in the story world is about preventing a missile strike upon like, basically every AI settlement in Asia. Basically, it's not actually about the the good guys, about the protagonist. It's interesting calling him the protagonist because obviously that was John David Washington's character in Tenet was called the protagonist, but it's not about Joshua and Alfie, the child. It's not about them turning things around and destroying human civilization. It's just about them preventing the destruction of AI civilization, which I found to be a very effective way at not necessarily remaining neutral, but just staying on a moral high ground where it's not inherently taking a side. It's just taking the side of people, not destroying people. And basically, it's an opposition to human malice, but it's not in direct opposition to the existence of humanity either. So I found that to be a very effective concept overall. I also found they have this ship. Basically, the American military have this ship called the Nomad, and it's like this. You've seen it in the trailers, but it's awesome. It's such a cool design. And the sound design as well. I mean, basically every scene in this film was just paced and shot beautifully. Like I was smiling at the very first scene of the soldiers rising out of the water when you have like the Nomad's laser targeting sort of booming down. It sort of like shifts between terrain. It makes these sort of loud booming beeping noises as it does so. It's such incredible sound design and visual design. However, the Nomad does represent a bit of a strange small issue in that the Nomad actually is very difficult to discern in terms of scale about where it actually is. Aside from that, you get Gareth Edwards' sense of scale throughout the film is actually perfectly delivered, except for the Nomad, because it's something that Gareth Edwards is really good at. You see it in Godzilla, you see it in Rogue One, how well he understands scale and conveying the size of creatures. It's why that Godzilla film is, in my opinion, underrated. It's not actually my favourite film in the MonsterVerse, but I think it's actually really underrated, and it's why, but that's the thing, it plays into my sensibilities more, I'm not inherently a huge fan of just big monsters just punching each other, because that's what Godzilla vs. Kong is. Like, Godzilla, the first one, is the 2014 one, is extremely focused on conveying the scale of these creatures and conveying this worldwide disaster, and that I find much more appealing, and this gets a lot of that in as well, just conveying this sense of scale and giving the world reality as well, which sort of just plays into how resourceful the filmmaking of this was. $80 million budget. I heard something about how they basically set up splinter groups to go and shoot on location to give them extremely realistic landscape shots. They would send extremely small film crews to these locations to get footage, so they really were not taking up too much time or money to do so. And it just results in such an effective and resourcefully made film, and it's just so damn impressive. The fact that it looks better than anything that's come out this year, actually. John Wick 4 obviously just looks real because most of it is real, but Mission Impossible 7, for example, while most of it was also real, it had this weird sort of digital sheen over it that I actually had a bit of a problem with. The most impressive stunt probably that's ever been filmed is him sort of riding off the cliff on the motorcycle, and yet they managed to make it not look real, even though it was, and I found that very disappointing. This film honestly looks more real than a lot of films that are completely real, and I think that's just a testament to when you have I want to be careful here in case it does come out that the VFX artists were crunched to shit on this, but I don't think they were, because my understanding of this kind of thing is that when a director has an extremely clear vision that they're able to convey well, then the VFX artist will get it right the first time, and they'll just be able to work on that and refine that version of things. It's also the fact that all of the effects was done after the entire thing was edited together. That means there was no excess VFX done, which is why I believe that there was no crunch involved. If it comes out that there was, then I obviously retract all this, and it's very disappointing that that would be the case. But it seems to me that that's not the case, and that's extremely um, uh, encouraging, I guess, and just positive. Um, so I've sort of complimented pretty much every aspect of this, and it's sort of to me, it's a more original story than people are giving it credit for. It's an extremely exciting story. It's performed basically perfectly. It looks incredible. I think the cinematography and the visuals are, frankly, the best I've ever seen in anything. And so it's immediately gained a very special place in my heart as a sci-fi film. Just in my opinion, being the pinnacle of what the genre can be. I do have a couple of criticisms, and it's mainly about the very end. See, here the thing is, I actually think the finale is really great, but I remember finding the very end, the ending shots of the film, to not be particularly satisfying. I don't like things that don't truly wrap up. You know, it's not a cliffhanger; it's just not wrapped up in a very fleshed out way. It just sort of leaves a lot to the imagination, from what I remember. Because I watched this film almost a week ago. It's longer than I usually take to record one of these things. But I sort of wanted to give myself more time to think. I didn't really have the time to do it either. Yeah, the very ending, and also there were some, I wouldn't call them plot holes, but there were things that sort of felt like plot holes, not pacing issues, but sort of things that didn't, in my opinion, weren't as easy to perceive as perhaps the filmmakers intended. I'm not talking about actual confusion with the plot. I'm just things that weren't conveyed as well as they perhaps should have been. And some things that weren't used as much as they should have been, like the child Alfie's powers didn't feel impactful enough. They were used as the main solution to the finale. Yes, that's actually true, but they just weren't used to that great effect overall, which made them feel slightly pointless. Aside from the finale, but that felt, it feels like it could have been something else. They could have come up with something else for the finale instead. Aside from that, it's a fantastic fucking film. It's amazing. I love pretty much everything about it. I think Ralph Ineson, who is you might know, he's made some appearances. He was a police officer in Kingsman, interrogating Eggsy, for example, and also the Green Knight in the Green Knight film. He played the Green Knight. And he's sort of done lots of other stuff. He's in sort of British film and TV, but he's known for his voice. And I actually didn't realize it was him at first. There was this American general, because obviously Ralph Ineson is not American, and also he doesn't look like Ralph Ineson in this film, but it was him, and I was so pleased that it was him, because I found this general to be such a captivating character. His voice was insane to listen to. It was really intriguing. So I just think choices like that I actually really appreciate. When films use sort of actors who are a little bit off kilter, like they sort of sound and look a way that you don't quite expect someone to, I actually really appreciate that. I think it gives it a sense of gravitas and intrigue and reality, actually. It embraces sort of people who maybe sound and even look a little bit different to like a typical movie star. So I found that I just appreciated that. And there was also one other thing that I picked up on, a really cool Easter egg. There's this scene where they're in a spaceport, and actually on like sort of the listing for destinations, you actually see it lists Scarif as a destination. Scarif is the planet on which the finale of Rogue One takes place. Gareth Edwards, of course, directed Rogue One, and I picked up on that and I thought that was a really cool detail. It wasn't too hidden, but obviously it's not. It is an Easter egg, obviously. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, there's not much more to it. I have some, like I say, I've been through them, some very small criticisms that really didn't take away from the overall enjoyment. It's still not the most original film ever, but it's basically just perfect sci-fi, and it was really exciting and really engaging and actually really emotional by the end. And it just appeals to me on every aesthetic level possible for science fiction specifically. So it's a very easy 9 out of 10 for me, possibly even 9.5, but Yeah, 9 out of 10 feels like the perfect score. Absolutely not lower than that. I recommend everyone to go and see it. The thing is, the way it's looking, it's actually not going to make its money back, despite being so cheap, which I find really upsetting. Not truly upsetting, but just really disappointing, because it deserves to make a lot. This deserves to be a $1 billion film, frankly. It's like taking on board sort of some of the more slow science fiction films recently, or I don't really know what it's doing, but in my opinion, it's really combining sort of very thoughtful, world building focused stuff with a really exciting plot that is worthy of, just better than most blockbusters. Really, this film deserves attention, deserves praise, and it deserves to make a lot of money. And it doesn't feel like it's going to make that much money, and it's also not being received as well as it should be. It's being received well, but not as well as it should be, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I recommend that you see it as soon as you can, if you still can, and definitely when it comes out as well, like on digital and physical releases. So yeah, that's The Creator. Great. If you enjoyed this, thank you so much. I'm not going to just say things like and subscribe, because it's obviously slightly different content. But if you are interested, I will do sort of these things for anything I go and see in cinemas. I don't know what the next thing's going to be. I assume the next thing will probably be. Well, it was going to be Dune Part 2, but it's probably actually going to be Argyle, Matthew Vaughn's new film with Henry Cavill. It's probably going to be that, actually. So, yeah, that's all I got. I'm not going to add any more fluff to this. All right.